Welcome to British Focus, your go-to channel for the latest political revelations shaking the UK. Tonight, we dive into a massive breaking story, a police investigation into Labour's deputy leader Angela Rayner. This is not just about electoral law violations. Sources reveal that at least a dozen officers from Greater Manchester Police are examining multiple allegations, including potential tax offences that have no statute of limitations. Could this be the scandal that brings down one of Labour's most prominent figures? Or is it simply a political smear campaign? Meanwhile, Labour's controversial election delays have ignited a firestorm of criticism, with accusations of manipulating the system to block Reform UK's rise. Is British democracy under threat? As Nigel Farage's party surges in the polls, the stakes have never been higher. Stay with us as we unpack every angle of this explosive story. Let's get into it.
Yes, a last-minute change to the top of tonight's show, to that huge breaking news. The police investigation into Angela Rayner is examining multiple allegations and is not merely limited to potential electoral law offences. That's according to reports that have just come out this evening. A source has told The Times that at least a dozen officers at Greater Manchester Police are investigating the Labour deputy leader over where she lived in the 2010s.
To just issues around the Representation of the People Act, this is the electoral law element, and of course that's significant because those offences are meant to be registered and investigated within 12 months. So of course now we're talking about different things. We don't know, for instance, the kind of exact detail of what they're looking into, but one potential issue, if it's involving two different houses, is capital gains tax, of course, and there is no kind of statutory limit on that, which means that potentially you could see an investigation and potential criminal offences, etc., being committed, and it wouldn't have a time limit on it. And so that's what we're really interested in. I've just been talking to some Conservative MPs, and they say, look, it's tax that really ought to be the thing that, if it's going to do for her, that's the thing that's going to do for her, because, there is no limitation on that. And of course, that's the thing that did, for instance, for Nadeem Zahawi, and some of them are pushing now for an HMRC investigation as well. So I think this is quite a significant development tonight, and the Times also reveals that at least a dozen officers are involved in this. So it's quite a big investigation from the sounds of it.
Angela Rayner she hasn't got the intellectual capacity. I'm sure she's a lovely person, but she just hasn't got the intellectual capacity to keep kind of telling fibs correctly. If you're going to, all politicians lie, all politicians embellish, but you've got to have a certain amount of intelligence to make sure that those lies and embellishments all kind of like fit together properly. So if you're challenged about each one of them individually, you can keep that lie or embellishment going, even if it's only a kind of white lie. With Angela Rayner, she just doesn't have the capacity, the mental capacity to do that properly. So she immediately stumbles. So one of the things that really made me laugh,
Angela Rayner, once seen as a rising star within Labour, now finds herself at the centre of a police investigation that could bring her entire career crashing down. Greater Manchester Police have confirmed that they are looking into multiple allegations, not just a potential breach of electoral law, but also questions surrounding her residency and tax affairs. This isn't just another political scandal. This is serious. A dozen officers are reportedly working on the case, digging into whether Rayner misrepresented her primary residence in the 2010s, something that could have implications for both election integrity and capital gains tax obligations. And let's be clear, if these allegations turn out to be true, it wouldn't just be an embarrassment for Labour, it would be career-ending for Rayner. Now, of course, the mainstream media and Labour loyalists are already trying to downplay the significance of this investigation. They'll tell you it's a witch hunt, a politically motivated attack designed to take down a key Labour figure ahead of the next election. But let's not forget, the police do not launch full-scale investigations into senior politicians unless there is substantial evidence to warrant it. And let's talk about the timing. The police don't act on baseless speculation, they follow facts. And right now, the facts point to serious questions about whether Angela Rayner has broken the law. What makes this even more interesting is that these allegations aren't new. Concerns about Rayner's residency have been circulating for years, yet Labour brushed them aside, dismissing them as irrelevant. Well, now they're relevant enough for the police to get involved. If an ordinary person was found to have misrepresented their primary residence, they wouldn't get away with it. They'd face serious legal consequences. Why should politicians be held to a different standard? And let's not forget, electoral law matters. It exists to protect democracy from fraud and manipulation. If Rayner did, in fact, mislead authorities about where she was living, that's a direct attack on the integrity of our electoral system. And if that wasn't enough, the tax angle could be even more damning. There's no statute of limitations on capital gains tax violations, meaning that even if Rayner thought she could escape scrutiny because too much time had passed, she was wrong. This investigation could go deep, very deep. Some within Labour are desperately trying to compare this to past Conservative scandals, but here's the problem. Labour has built its brand on claiming to be the party of honesty, of integrity, of fighting against corruption. If Rayner is found guilty of these allegations, it will expose the sheer hypocrisy at the heart of the party. You cannot preach about integrity while bending the rules when it suits you. So the question now is, how far will this go? Will the police pursue criminal charges, or will this be quietly swept under the rug to protect Labour's image? Because let's be honest, if a Conservative MP were facing the exact same allegations, Labour and the media would be calling for their immediate resignation. Yet, when it's Angela Rayner, suddenly it's all a misunderstanding, an overreaction, a smear campaign. Funny how that works, isn't it?
When I heard that the Labour government, despite any manifesto commitment, want to completely change the shape of local government, and that is now being used by the Conservative Party, who in fact run most of the county councils, as a reason to cancel the elections. No, I'm not making it up. Over half of the county councils in Britain have said, because these changes are coming, we want the elections cancelled on May the 1st. It looks like about 10 million of you who would have had the right to vote on that day will not be able to. This is absolutely monstrous. We haven't heard a big debate about it because both Labour and the Conservatives agree. They are terrified of the rise of reform. They know just how well we're going to do on May the 1st, and they've cancelled the elections in many of our strongest areas. Well, I promise you, we will fight those that are still up. We will do well, but I'm pretty angry. This denial of our democracy is something that is fundamentally un-British, anti-British, it's undemocratic, and it shows how rotten the whole system is now in British politics. There is no doubt in my mind, when you look at it, that Britain...
I'm still with political and social commentator James Melville. James, let's talk, if we can, briefly about Angela Rayner's devolution revolution. Sounds almost as dreary as it actually is. She looks now set, because lots of areas are being reorganised with a view to everyone having an elected mayor. Already... I believe Greater Lincolnshire, Hull and East Yorkshire have been assigned mayors, or at least they will be allowed to vote for their mayors. Also up for this are Hampshire, Sussex, Kent, Essex and Cheshire and others, all earmarked to become areas with elected mayors. Now, that's okay, I suppose, although I do worry. I just feel that, the more you devolution sounds great, but the more you devolve, the more you make government local government preside over national government, the more difficult a country becomes to govern. So I wonder whether or not we're going too far down this road. But the main point to make here is Angela Rayner, funnily enough, said, these areas that are getting reorganised, they were going to have their local elections in May, along with the rest of the local councils of this country. But maybe they won't have them now while they're in the process of reorganisation. Perhaps if they feel, that this reorganisation will somehow or other make it difficult to have these elections, they should let us know and we won't have those elections. In other words, that's the way Angela Rayner is plotting to get out of the inevitable humiliation that the Labour Party will suffer come May, because they're going to get a shellacking in the local elections. They're going to get humiliated. So what's she trying to do? She's trying to stop the elections. It's outrageous.
Let's call this what it is, an attack on democracy. The Labour government has decided, without any real debate, to cancel local elections in 9 council areas across the country. That means millions of voters who are supposed to have their say this May will now have to wait until 2026. And why? Because Labour claims it's all part of a restructuring process linked to devolution. But let's be honest, does anyone actually believe that? Or is this just a desperate attempt to avoid an electoral disaster? Look at the areas affected: East Sussex, West Sussex, Essex, Hampshire, Isle of Wight, Norfolk, Suffolk, Surrey. These are places where Labour is deeply unpopular, where the Conservatives and Reform UK were expected to make gains. So what does Labour do? Pull the plug on democracy. They know that if these elections go ahead, they'll suffer a humiliating defeat. The polls are clear, Reform UK is surging, Labour support is dropping, and even the Tories, battered as they are, were still likely to hold their ground in these areas. Instead of facing the voters, Labour has chosen to deny them the right to vote altogether. And the worst part? They're getting away with it. Imagine for a second that the roles were reversed. If the Tories or Reform UK had cancelled elections in areas where Labour was gaining momentum, the media would be in full meltdown mode. There would be outrage, protests, accusations of fascism. But when Labour does it, silence. Or worse, weak justifications about how structural changes require delays. But let's be clear, councils always go through restructuring. Yet, somehow, this is the first time in modern British history that elections have been outright cancelled like this. And what does Angela Rayner say? That holding elections now would be a waste of taxpayer money since some councils are transitioning to unitary authorities. Well, here's a thought. Why wasn't this planned properly? If devolution really required these changes, why weren't they implemented before election cycles were scheduled? Why are we only hearing about this now, right when Labour's popularity is taking a nosedive? This isn't about efficiency, it's about manipulation. And here's something even more sinister. This isn't just about stopping the Conservatives. It's also about blocking Reform UK from gaining a foothold. Thurrock Council, for example, was seen as a key battleground for reform. In fact, polling experts were predicting that Nigel Farage's party could have won control there, a huge breakthrough moment that would have sent shockwaves through Westminster. And yet, just like that, the elections are gone. Reform UK's best shot at a major political victory has been erased before it could even happen. This is what political cowardice looks like. Labour knows it's losing public support, so instead of fighting fair, they're moving the goalposts. And make no mistake, this sets a dangerous precedent. If Labour can cancel elections today, what's stopping them from finding new excuses to delay future votes? What's stopping them from saying, oh, actually, a general election right now would be too disruptive, maybe we should wait another year? This is how democracy is eroded, not in one grand, obvious move, but piece by piece, while people are too distracted to notice. And here's what really gets me. Labour spent years attacking the Tories over democracy. They screamed about cronyism, corruption, and the need for transparency. And yet here they are, engaging in outright election interference to protect themselves. Where's the accountability? Where's the outcry from the so-called defenders of democracy? It's nowhere, because the truth is, they only care about democracy when it benefits them.
Fairly vague lines in the Labour manifesto talking about increasing devolution, but nothing on the scale of what's been foisted upon these counties. And so there's 9 councils, mixture of counties and unitaries, that have had their request to cancel their elections accepted. There were a number of other councils that tried, and quite frankly, it's a disgrace. We live in a democracy. Part of being in a democracy is the ability to vote in our elected representatives, but also, crucially, vote them out. And the councillors that were elected, or the last time this set of councillors were elected, was back in 2021. It was the height of Boris's kind of vaccine bounce. The political context has changed very dramatically since then, as we all know. And we think that even if the government and councils want to go ahead with these structural changes, we think these elections should be used as an opportunity for those people who want to carry on those negotiations to get the mandate to deliver the change they want. If you want to take on more powers, then you need to also be held to account for the way that you've exercised the powers you've already had. So in Essex, in Surrey, in Hampshire, Isle of Wight, and Sussex, these councillors are getting away with the ability to hide from their electorate, and that's outrageous. 5.5 million people are being denied their right to vote.
And I've been asking about the cancelling of these elections. You call it the cowardice of the political class. It's 9 areas, isn't it, that are having their elections delayed as a result of this kind of what you might call restructuring, if you like, of some regions. But I mean, when they were standing for government, I don't remember them talking about doing this. I mean, I might have missed it somewhere in the manifesto, but was there any notion that this was going to happen until relatively recently?
There might have been a couple of
If there was a general election tomorrow, more people would vote for Nigel Farage and Reform than would vote for the Conservatives. And this is the very first time a poll has found this, for Labour as well. Nigel Farage, up until now, has led what I think you could...
Not good news for Labour this morning. Apparently, they've slumped into 3rd place. That's according to a recent voting intentions poll. They trail the Conservatives, and here's the really sharp bit. For the first time, they're trailing Nigel Farage's Reform UK.
The fallout from this election cancellation scandal is far from over. In fact, it's only just beginning. The sheer audacity of Labour's move has ignited a political firestorm, and the backlash is growing by the day. Reform UK, already surging in the polls, is using this as clear evidence that the establishment is terrified of them. And honestly, can you blame them? Nigel Farage's party was on track to make serious gains, particularly in areas like Thurrock, where they could have won control of the council. Instead of facing that challenge head-on, Labour simply erased the election altogether. And let's be real, this isn't just about one vote. This is about trust in democracy itself. If people feel that elections can just be cancelled when the ruling party doesn't like the outcome, what faith will they have in future votes? Labour has spent years accusing the Tories of corruption, of rigging the system in their favour, of betraying democracy. Yet now, they are the ones actively suppressing the electorate. The hypocrisy is staggering. Meanwhile, the Conservatives, supposedly the main opposition, are flailing. Instead of leading the charge against this blatant electoral manipulation, they seem paralysed, too afraid of the optics to push back with real force. This is why Reform UK is growing. People are sick and tired of politicians who play by the rules only when it suits them. They want real opposition, and right now, Reform is the only party willing to call out Labour's power grab for what it is. And let's talk about the polls, because they tell a very clear story. Reform UK is climbing week after week, now polling ahead of the Tories in some surveys. This isn't a minor shift, this is a seismic political realignment. People who once felt they had no choice but to vote Conservative are now abandoning the party altogether. And Labour? They might still be leading, but let's not forget, when people lose faith in the system, it doesn't just hurt the ruling party. It destabilises the entire political landscape. If Labour thought cancelling these elections would secure their position, they may have just accelerated their own downfall. So, where does this leave us? We now live in a Britain where elections can be cancelled at will, where a party that's supposed to stand for fairness and transparency is engaged in naked electoral interference, and where the so-called opposition is too weak to fight back. But people are watching. The more Labour tries to silence the public, the more determined the public will become. Reform UK isn't going anywhere, and neither is the growing frustration across the country. And that's where things get interesting, because this isn't the last political scandal we'll be covering. If you think this is bad, wait until you see what's coming next. Stay tuned, things are about to get even more explosive.